Walls of Destiny. Part 1. Chapter 7. A Tale of Two Skirmishes. After a few more hours of travel and enjoying the open fields and the subtle hints of the approaching season, the increasing warmth as they moved south, the occasional appearance of insects and birds, and other signs, a tree line began to appear to the south and southwest. Their destination through the daunting forest lay to the southwest, the enchanted forest to the northeast and east, and their new campsite before them. There was a few more hours of daylight left for them to enjoy and rest up before the long gloom of the bog. Again, they set up their tents and their tarps and made things as comfortable as possible. Mylo and Longfellow tossed a makeshift ball back and forth in a rudimentary game of catch after the camp was prepared. Burdock looked on in delight as the animals happily grazed in the lush fields. After watching them for several minutes, he smiled, took a deep breath, and walked over to where the young men were playing catch. I bet some fresh fish cooked over an open fire would raise everyone's spirits a bit. There was a small brook back there a bit just near the road. Perhaps you two could catch us all some dinner, said the wizard. Mylo and Longfellow glanced at each other, and without hesitation unpacked their fishing gear and headed to the brook. Is it wise to send them off by themselves? Asked Losgrel. It is just up the road. I am sure they will be fine. It will be good for Mylo to do something he enjoys. Losgrel shook his head in annoyance and followed the two in secret. They walked north along the path. Mylo was silent and glanced often to the east over the rolling hills of faded grass and clusters of alders and gray birch trees. I hope the stream doesn't flow from the enchanted forest, joked Long. Burdock wouldn't have sent us if it was unsafe, said Mylo soberly as he looked again to the east. Do you think that is the same enchanted forest that Ellie and I visited? I mean, how far east does it extend? I don't know. I don't think there is more than one of them. At least not around here, answered Longfellow. How far is it from here? Asked Mylo. Why? Inquired Long. The brook. The two fished for about an hour, catching a total of 7 fish between them while Losgrel lurked in the background watching over them. They arrived at the camp safely and divided the fish equally among them and settled around the campfire. The night grew cold, but not as cold as the night before, and the threat of rain was all but absent. Everyone had gathered around the fire, and Burdock recited a chilling but exciting ghost story. The same pattern as the night before began to unfold, beginning with Burdock urging everyone to get some rest before tomorrow's long ride through the bog. Burdock and Losgrel went into their tent, Mylo and Longfellow into theirs, and once again Napari stayed out by the fire. And once again, the seer's prediction had been on Mylo's mind all day. It was time, he imagined, to confront her about her dream. Mylo looked over at Longfellow, who appeared to already be in a deep sleep. He quietly got up and went out by the fire to sit with Napari. Can't sleep, uttered Mylo. I don't expect to sleep much tonight either. This cold, tomorrow's journey, and the fate of Cimmeria, added Napari. She looked across the fire at Mylo, the flames reflecting their light on the seer's intense green eyes. I know you are angry with me over what happened, but I can only see what the gods show me, what they want me to see. It is difficult to understand their agenda sometimes. You have come to sit with me because of the dream I had, have you not? Mylo felt anger build up inside him because she once again knew his thoughts. He gave a quick nod and waited for her to continue. I know this is something you don't want to hear, but you will give in to your fears. The gods had hoped you were ready to fulfill your destiny of playing a part in a drama that would change not only Cimmeria but the entire world. The seer's pronouncement about the entire world both confused and intrigued Mylo, and he looked on hoping she might elaborate. Yes, Mylo. Cimmeria is one of many lands on this planet, and you are destined to affect the fate of them all, but alas, things have changed. You are not yet ready and may never be ready. The mission will fail, and you will return home. I am sorry to have to tell you this, but believe it or not, I have grown to care about you, and I don't want you to play into the false hope that this group has. Is there nothing I can do to change things? Back at the walled city, you said my destiny was malleable, asked Mylo frantically. It did seem that way up until her death. She paused as she shivered and pulled her blanket over her head. I am sorry, but as of late my vision has been clouded regarding the mission and related issues, but this has become quite clear to me in the last day and a half, said the seer remorsefully. Napari gazed intently into the fire. I don't believe you. I can change things, said Mylo, his voice growing louder, threatening to wake the others. He arose in anger. You are wrong. You are wrong about everything, he said as he went back into the tent. Mylo drifted in and out of sleep, disrupted by the nagging thoughts implanted into his vulnerable mind by the Cedronavian prophetess. In between the cycles of restless sleep, he forcibly envisioned himself bravely and heroically defeating his enemies with his sword, and sometimes with his slingshot, hitting each of his targets with skillful precision, but upon dreaming he could only do the opposite. Mylo awoke before dawn, the camp still wrapped in the quiet of early morning. As he lay in his bedroll, he wrestled with his thoughts, considering his next move. Maintaining the charade with the others seemed increasingly futile, bound to lead only to disappointment. More pressing, however, was his need for solace. He needed to escape his pain and grief, to find some measure of peace. The memory of his day in the enchanted forest with Ellie rose to the forefront of his mind, a fleeting glimpse of joy amidst the turmoil. With a resolve that cut through his sorrow, he decided to seek that solace. He moved silently and swiftly, gathering his essentials from the darkness of the tent before slipping outside. The campfire was little more than embers, and Nipari was slumped, appearing to sleep soundly. With the moonlight guiding him, Mylo set off northeast, toward the forest. As the first light of day began to creep over the horizon, the camp stirred. Longfellow roused himself to tend the fire, preparing for their final meal at the campsite. "Is Mylo still asleep?" the wizard asked, his tone tinged with concern. "No, I assumed he was out relieving himself," Longfellow replied, glancing around. Losgrel moved quickly, peering into the tent and scanning the ground. "Nipari," he called out urgently. "Did you see or hear anything during the night?" Nipari shook her head. "I'm sorry, no." "His tracks lead this way," exclaimed Losgrel, pointing to the northeast. Burdock, looking anxious, turned to the seer and asked, "Did Mylo say anything before he left? Did he hint that he might leave us?" Nipari again shook her head. "No, he didn't." Burdock turned to Longfellow. "Did he mention anything to you?" "He spoke of his visit to the enchanted forest with Ellie," Longfellow said. "The enchanted forest?" The wizard's voice grew urgent. "We must find him before he gets there. The forest is vast, over 1,000 acres. If he's already inside, finding him will be nearly impossible. I hope we're not too late." "We'll intercept him," Losgrel declared, mounting his horse. "Jack is still here and should be able to track him. Longfellow, come with us. Nipari, you stay here and wait for our return." Burdock began communicating with Jack with the same sign language he used back at the house and instructed him to pick up Mylo's scent. Once on Apex, he led the way, with Longfellow riding Nipari's horse alongside him and Losgrel and Glide just ahead of them. The journey was swift at first, but as the terrain shifted to a slightly denser terrain, their progress slowed. The field became dotted with small groves of alder and poplar, which made tracking more challenging. Mylo believes that in the forest, he will find relief from his troubles. But that is far from the truth. Places like these should never be used for such purposes. Just a few moments can alter one's perceptions. Staying longer can cause madness, mused Burdock. Let us hope we do not have to go in after him. After another hour of riding, Burdock looked at the others and gestured. "The forest is growing near," Burdock said, as he rode closer to Jack and once again communicated with him. "Jack says Mylo is close." As they approached a cluster of poplars, their horses grew skittish, bucking and whinnying as if sensing danger. "Something's spooking them," Losgrel noted, his hand moving to the hilt of his sword. Burdock asked Jack for insights. "What is happening, Jack?" Jack answered, bobbing his head and swinging his trunk rhythmically. "There's another scent," the wizard announced, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "We're not alone." Losgrel moved ahead, drawing his sword and surveying the area with cautious precision. The horses, now fully agitated, stood still as the group braced for what was to come. Without warning, 5 armed men emerged from the foliage, 2 from either side and 1 from the grove, surrounding them in an instant. The intruders wore black masks, and their dark wool capes and blue or green knee pants marked them as a coordinated threat. Crossbows and longbows were trained on the trio, with swords poised for action. "Easy, Jack," Burdock murmured, soothing the elephant as he edged closer to the elephant. "What do you want?" demanded Losgrel, eyeing the masked men intently. "Your weapons," one of the swordsmen ordered coldly. "Drop them here." Losgrel's eyes narrowed. "You don't want to do this. You don't know who you're dealing with." The men's weapons remained steadily aimed, and with no other option, the trio began to disarm themselves. Losgrel, clearly reluctant, tossed his sword onto the ground. "You," the swordsman said, pointing at Burdock. "You're a wizard." "Yes? That includes your staff. Put it in the pile." Burdock hesitated but complied, eyeing their leader warily. "Now, off the horses," commanded the bowman. "We will be relieving you of your valuables and your animals." Mylo came to the edge of the enchanted forest and gazed into the thick tangle of flora within. Around him swarmed a glowing mist of blue and violet hues, engulfing him in a strange warmth. Before him it seemed as though the trees pulled back and the understory began to part, revealing a trail which seemed to invite him in. He hesitated before falling to his knees. He cried out to the forest in pain. "Can you give me happiness?" he sobbed. "Can you bring me peace?" He remained there for a few moments until he began to hear a voice coming from inside his head. "Happiness awaits you in my forest, Mylo." "Who said that?" asked Mylo, looking all around. "It is I, the spirit of the forest. I can offer you many things. The creatures of the forest, they remember you and speak of you often. They are happy you have decided to return," said the voice in a whimsical tone. "How can this be? How does a forest talk?" said Mylo out loud. "Everything you could ever want is here. All manner of food you could want is contained in these woods. All you need to do is enter through the path." "It has been said that the food in the forest will make you forget who you were outside of it," reasoned Mylo. "But isn't that what you wish, Mylo? The food in these woods will grant you health and long life. And the new life you shall have in here will make your old life not worth remembering. My trees will bow down to you. Won't you enter my forest?" "But it is your forest. If I enter, Will I belong to you as well? Asked Mylo desperately. A valid question, young lad. There is a large section of this forest which is unclaimed. It is reserved for you to reign over and manage however you see fit. Of course, every king must have his queen. All this are yours if you enter my forest. A queen? My queen is dead. None can replace her, sighed Mylo. No, Mylo. Her spirit returned here. The one place she felt solace from her troubles, just like you did. I will reanimate her, and you will rule the forest together. Come into the forest at once and have these things, said the spirit with increasing urgency. Just then, voices and a commotion could be heard behind him just a few hundred yards away. Danger comes, Mylo. Quickly now, come into the safety of my forest before it's too late, hissed the spirit. His heart raced as he recognized his friends' voices and the dire situation they were in. Forgetting his quest for peace and the talking forest, he crept closer to investigate. Mylo, you're making a mistake, said the spirit desperately as Mylo went to his friend's aid. Positioning himself behind a bush, Mylo readied his old slingshot. He found a smooth stone and aimed carefully at one of the swordsmen. With a deep breath, he released the projectile, hitting the man squarely in the head. The swordsman staggered, dropping his weapon and clutching his head in pain. The distraction allowed Losgrel to roll forward and snatch up his sword. As he stood, he struck at one of the crossbowmen, forcing the weapon from his hands. An arrow whizzed past him as he dodged. Burdock, seizing the moment, pulled a small hazel wand from his jacket and shouted, "Wah! Sidar!" A flash of yellow light blinded the remaining archers. He followed with a powerful left hook to one of the stunned men, surprising even Longfellow, who marveled at the wizard's fighting prowess. Losgrel, engaged with the swordsman, now joined by the wounded crossbowman. Despite the odds, he fought bravely. Meanwhile, the swordsman Mylo had struck began advancing on Burdock, only to be intercepted by Longfellow, who drew his own sword. In the chaos, Burdock attempted to retrieve his staff, but the melee obstructed him. The wand's power seemed spent, and the archers were recovering. Mylo, unable to get a clear shot, drew his sword and joined the fray. Just as one of the archers prepared to strike Burdock, Mylo took him down with a decisive blow. Longfellow, struggling against the swordsman, was aided by Mylo's timely intervention. The two fought together, Mylo's skill countering the swordsman's attacks. Finally, Burdock managed to grab his staff and raised it high. "Was! Ibada," he commanded loudly. A thunderous boom reverberated, halting the fight. The attackers, shocked and subdued, lowered their weapons. Burdock pointed his staff menacingly. "Leave these lands and never return, or you might join your fallen comrade," he warned. The masked men, fearful of further retribution, fled into the northwestern woods, abandoning their weapons. Mylo watched, astonished and shaken. "I never thought I'd have to kill someone," he said quietly, gazing at the fallen enemy. "I never imagined I'd use the sword." "It's all right, Mylo," Burdock said, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "If not for your quick thinking, things could have been much worse. I owe you my thanks." "No," Mylo replied, his gaze fixed on the ground. "It's my fault we're in this mess. I should have foreseen this." "It's not your fault the princess died," Burdock said firmly. "We can't change the past, only move forward with courage like that which you've just shown." Mylo told Burdock about the spirit of the forest and recounted all that it had offered him if he entered, and that he might have believed the spirit had it not been for the fact that his friends needed him. Burdock listened and nodded, for he knew of the deceptive nature of the forest. After letting Mylo finish explaining, Burdock spoke only a few words, that even if the forest could offer them none of those things, wealth, power, fame, fulfillment of desire, or honor can bring true happiness. Losgrel, observing the retreating figures of the masked men, spoke up. "We should return to camp. There may be more of them, and they might come back for their weapons. Or worse, find our camp. Next time, we might not be so fortunate." "Losgrel is right. Let us get back to camp quickly," said the wizard as Mylo climbed up on Jack. In an instant they began to ride. Burdock rode alongside Mylo and smiled and gave an affirming nod to Mylo and his brave actions. By the time they got back to the camp, the morning was all but spent. They were quickly burning daylight. The bog was still another 3 hours' ride, but they had to press on. They could not risk staying at the camp another night. Their location was compromised. As quickly as they could, they packed up the campsite and were again on the move. Mylo thought about the cowardice he had shown at one point in the day by running away and the bravery he showed later on. He wondered how two such opposite tendencies could coexist within him and what determined which one would prevail. Was it him who was in control, or was it the Norn or destiny or something else? It was bewildering to think about. Burdock rode alongside Losgrel and spoke. "I do think the incident back at the forest has finally snapped Mylo out of his grief." "I see a change in him already," said Burdock in a low voice as they trotted along. "Perhaps we should still keep a close eye on him for the time being," said Losgrel soberly, not taking his eyes off the path. "Yes, perhaps. But we do owe him our gratitude nevertheless," rebutted Burdock. The dank and earthy smell of the bog began to roll in from the west, indicating to the group that the long dark path lay just ahead of them. "How long is the path through the bog, Burdock?" asked Longfellow. Even if it were an easy path, it would take a full day of riding to get to Raller's house. It will be much longer, however, and we cannot set up camp. It is simply too dangerous with bandits lurking about. We must push on through the night without stopping, said the wizard with a hint of regret in his voice. Well, is everybody ready? As they approached the edge of the bog, Burdock guided the group south looking for the only path that cut through it. It was traveled very little and could easily be missed by anyone who didn't know what signs to look for, and fortunately Burdock knew. We enter here, exclaimed the wizard, guiding his horse to the hidden path. The stench of decaying vegetation was heavy in the air as they marched single file on the narrow, elevated path. On each side of them lie thick mud and tangled and gnarled roots. Plumes of eerie fog rose up from the ground and into the canopy above. The light had all but vanished as they proceeded further in. You will get used to the smell. Give it an hour or so, began Burdock. It is essential that we do not stray from the path. Danger lurks around each corner. The bog is unforgiving of error, said Burdock as he fiddled with his staff. A yellow glow began to emanate from the end of the staff, lighting their way. Longfellow glanced at Mylo in surprise and great concern, reacting to Burdock's candid words. As they braved the damp darkness, the unfamiliar chirps and croaks called out from beyond their sight. Eyes of many sizes and shapes stared at them through the moss-covered branches which seemed to reach out for them. The horses began to grow uneasy. Hold, commanded Burdock as everyone came to a halt. There is movement ahead, he whispered. I thought I saw something move over there, whispered Mylo. They could feel whatever it was watching them, studying them. What have you led us into, wizard? Asked Losgrel, his voice tinged with both anger and concern. A long guttural croaking noise sounding like some primordial battle cry resonated throughout the tangled woods around them. Moss creepers, cried Burdock. Prepare yourselves, he yelled as rustling and the sound of webbed feet slapping against the muddy earth could be heard all around them. Mylo turned around in time to see two small humanoid toad-like creatures nimbly leaping across the path, knocking Losgrel from his horse. Mylo and Longfellow jumped down from Jack, who was beginning to rear up and stomp his feet, making earth-shaking thuds. They drew their swords and raced toward Losgrel. Losgrel recovered and had drawn his sword and was fighting three of the green-skinned beasts, slashing and stabbing. He ran two of them through immediately. The other stabbed at him with a crude wooden spear which was blocked by the knight. Mylo cut Losgrel's attacker down with his sword before several more came into view. Burdock, keeping the light of his staff aimed at the melee, cried, "There are too many of them." The wizard shouted a magical incantation, and a burst of air expanded out from his staff, sending the little beast hurling back into the woods. Meanwhile, Napari, clutching a magical charm, tried desperately to calm her horse, who was highly agitated, as were the other animals. Back on the animals. Get them turned around. We must go back, cried Burdock. The men slew 3 more creepers before mounting the animals. There was just enough room for the horses and Jack to turn around. As soon as they turned around, behind them emerged what seemed like thousands of eyes behind them, bobbing and hopping toward them. Ride, cried Burdock. As he rode, Burdock held his staff high and it emitted a thunderous boom which froze the creatures in their tracks, pausing their pursuit and buying them time. They rode faster than they had ever ridden before. Within a few minutes the moss creepers had given up and they were again approaching the field to the east. They did not stop until they reached the light of the field. Losgrel rode alongside Burdock, looking at him, waiting for some kind of explanation for what just happened. Moss creepers are never this far north this time of year, and they are never so aggressive, began the wizard. Something must be driving them north prematurely, he said as he dismounted to check the animals. Losgrel and the others also dismounted. So, what do we do now? Asked Losgrel. You are wounded, said Burdock. Let me take a look. It's just a scratch, said the knight as he wrapped it. I hope there is a backup plan. Well, yes, of course, stuttered Burdock. Well, the backup plan is, we ride north and get on the Chinzi highway, said the wizard, lifting his hat and scratching his head. But I thought you said the highway was dangerous also, said Longfellow. Not if we disguise ourselves as merchants, yes, on the way to Calamando, said the wizard. Why not go south around the bog? Asked Losgrel. If there are moss creepers this far north, there will surely be even further south. The bog extends south for miles. We would risk having to turn around again. Wouldn't an elephant on the highway draw attention? Asked Losgrel with a hint of sarcasm in his voice. Elephants are not an uncommon sight on the highway in early spring, offered Burdock. It is late winter, and besides, there will be many travelers on the road. Spies, bounty hunters, mercenaries. You said it yourself. The highway is a last resort, said Losgrel soberly. It is precisely a last resort. But there will also be other merchants on the road, and people just trying to get from one point to the other. I think we will blend in quite nicely, said Burdock, optimism resonating in his voice. And we simply have no other option. After some debate, they were once again on the move, traveling north, slightly northwest toward the Chinzi highway. It was well past midday, and they would have to look for a place to camp before nightfall. For some distance, they rode parallel to the dreaded bog as it occasionally came into view, and its earthy aroma bordering on rotted vegetation was a reminder of the near-fatal encounter. Burdock once again led the way. Losgrel rode behind the group to look for threats to the rear, occasionally speeding up to the front, staying in regular communication with the wizard leading them. Mylo and Longfellow rode behind Burdock and Napari, behind them. Losgrel again rode to the front alongside Burdock. How much longer to the highway, he asked. Not far. Less than a half hour, I would estimate, said the wizard as he took note of the position of the sun. Losgrel, there is something that has concerned me greatly ever since we left the bog. Out with it, said Losgrel bluntly. It is Napari. Do you trust her? Asked the wizard in a whispered tone. Yushime trusts her, therefore do I, he replied. From my observations, Yushime's trust, and yours, is quite misplaced. She did not foresee Mylo leaving the group for the enchanted forest. She did not foresee the attack by the bandits, or the moss creepers. She has offered nothing useful to us regarding Raybor. She stays up late by the fire doing who knows what, and she contributes little if nothing to the mission. She barely knows how to cook, said the wizard in growing agitation. On top of that, Mylo hates her. Her presence is wearing on him, he added, raising his voice. Losgrel paused. Burdock could see that Losgrel realized the truth of his words. This is highly inadvisable, he began. It was Yushime's will that she accompany us. We can't just leave her. Longfellow strained to hear what the two ahead of them were talking about. What are they saying, Mylo? He asked. Something about her, he said in a whisper, glancing briefly back at Napari. And Yushime, but I can't make out what. The two of them continued to attempt to listen in on the conversation. She could even be hindering us, preventing us from receiving a vision of the prince's intentions, continued Burdock. We wouldn't just leave her. We would leave her horse with her. And enough supplies to get her to where she needs to go. This is highly irregular, but I will trust your judgment, whispered Losgrel. But just remember whose idea this was should we need to answer for it. When do we leave her? Our next stop. We ride without her tomorrow, replied Burdock. The next part borders on the unethical, but I think it is necessary. We do not want her trying to follow us. Losgrel glanced at Burdock waiting for him to continue. Burdock briefly looked behind him, and the two elephant riders quickly pretended not to be listening. In a low voice, Burdock said to Losgrel, I can produce a special infusion and add the ingredient to her meal. She will awaken refreshed and ready for whatever the next chapter of her life may bring. Losgrel gave a look of disapproval, but said nothing as he fell back to his position behind the others. He briefly eyed Napari before looking away as he rode by. As all traces of the bog began to fade from the senses, so did the warmth of the daylight. They were nearing the highway, and they would need to find a place to camp. We approach the highway, announced the wizard. There is a town on the other side to the north. In the morning, I will go there and procure a wagon and some supplies as part of our cover as merchants. We will cross the highway and set up camp for the night. By the time they arrived at the edge of the road, most of the day's activities and travels had come to an end, but though there were less travelers, those on the road so late were of the more dangerous variety. Losgrel sped ahead of the group and dismounted. He skillfully examined the road and knelt down and placed his ear onto the sandy surface of the road. They watched as he listened for several minutes as the sun worked its way toward the horizon. Finally, he gave the signal for them to cross, and they began their search for a place to set up camp. They rode northwest along an old, overgrown path for about 15 minutes before discovering a small grove ideal for setting up camp. They gathered wood and built a fire before setting up their tents by the light of the moon and the flickering light of the flames. While the rest of the group prepared to settle around the fire as they had on previous nights, Losgrel and Longfellow went out to collect more wood. Burdock retreated to his tent with a lantern in one hand and a map of the surrounding area in the other. Mylo and Napari, left by the fire, busied themselves with dinner. Mylo, famished, rigged a tripod over the fire and hung a large iron pot filled with water, while Napari chopped carrots, potatoes, and other various roots they had foraged before fetching the last of their dried beef. As the water reached a rolling boil and the ingredients were added, Napari fixed her gaze on Mylo. Mylo, she began, sometimes my predictions aren't about whether they're right or wrong, or if they come true, but rather about what the client needs to hear to move forward. I'm not your client, and this isn't a game, Mylo retorted sharply. Just admit it. You were wrong about me, just like I said. Burdock burst from his tent, looking alarmed. What's all the yelling about? He demanded, glancing between them. Nothing, Burdock. Sorry for the disturbance, Mylo replied, as Burdock grumbled and returned to his tent. After waiting for the wizard to settle, the seer gave a swift stir to the cooking pot and looked at Mylo. I know you don't believe me, but I genuinely care about you and want to see you grow, Napari continued, raising a hand as Mylo attempted to interrupt. Please, let me finish. Tonight is the last night we will sit around a fire together. Tomorrow, the group will leave me behind, and you'll be rid of me. You've seen this? But why would they bring you this far only to leave you? Mylo asked, surprised by his newly found concern for the seer. Someone hinders our mission. Someone prevents us, even me, from seeing into Raybor's heart. Someone very powerful. They think it is I who jeopardized the mission, but they are wrong, said the seer remorsefully. Are you sure of this? Mylo asked, guiding his horse to the hidden path. I have sensed a powerful presence shrouded in mystery ever since we left Central Midlandia. You mustn't tell the others, at least not anytime soon. You must promise me this. I feel revealing this may further endanger the mission, said the seer. As Mylo listened, the sounds of snapping twigs and footsteps to the east of the grove signaled the return of Loskrell and Longfellow, each carrying a large load of wood. Good of you to give us a hand, Mylo, joked Longfellow as he stacked the wood. They gathered around the fire for a much-needed meal and some light conversation. The firelight cast a warm glow on Napari's golden locks as she stared silently into the flames. The others chatted while avoiding eye contact with her, the anticipation of the coming day hanging heavy in the air. Not long after their meal, everyone retired to their tents and fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, before the others had even emerged from their tents, Burdock had already set off for the village to the north to procure a wagon. Mylo found some dry twigs nearby, broke them up, and rekindled the campfire, which quickly blazed back to life. Jack had led the horses to a grassy patch just east of the campsite, while Longfellow distributed apples and a generous handful of walnuts from their diminishing stockpile of food. After a modest breakfast, Mylo and Longfellow played a game of catch, discussing potential fishing spots to pass the time while they awaited the wizard's return. You should conserve your energy, Loskrell advised sternly. A long ride awaits us. When the wizard returns, we won't be stopping until we reach Rallers. Mylo shook his head in disapproval, tossing the ball back to Longfellow. That just means this is our last chance for fun for a while, Longfellow murmured. Hours passed as they awaited Burdock's return. Loskrell busied himself, inspecting and sharpening weapons, while Mylo led the animals to a nearby watering hole and ensured they were well fed. Napari and Longfellow kept the fire going and gathered more wood. When Mylo returned, he found Napari engrossed in a prophecy about Longfellow's future. Waiting for an appropriate moment, Mylo confronted Longfellow about his conversation with the seer. You really should know better than to listen to her by now, scolded Mylo. Her words are poison. The others finally see it as well. When we ride, we do so without the likes of her, said Mylo in a whisper. Longfellow, blindsided by the news, glanced briefly at the seer and back at Mylo. Does she know? What will she do? Asked Longfellow frantically. His inquiry was interrupted as Loskrell came out of the tent and gathered the others around the fire. Please, everyone, be seated, he began. As you know, we have a long ride ahead which will span well into the night. Burdock has prepared elixirs for each of us to drink to keep our energy and alertness up for the duration of the journey. He instructed me to give these at midday. Drink them now, as Burdock should be returning within the next hour or two, he said as he passed the small glass bottles to each person. Napari, pretending not to notice the small spot of ink which alone marked her bottle, glanced knowingly at Mylo, then drank the brew. Within an hour, Mylo and Longfellow watched as Napari arose from her seat by the fire and staggered into her tent and fell fast asleep. Mylo's eyes met Longfellow's, and Loskrell averted his eyes in shame as each pondered the ethics of what had just been done. They then broke down the camp and packed everything up except for Napari's tent and a sack of supplies to sustain her return home.